Good afternoon. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be able to address this crowd. I have deep respect to London Business School and what it represents. In my time in the private sector, I've always been keen to send some of my colleagues, whether for the full-time MBA or for the executive MBA programs here at London. So it's actually a great privilege to be able to be here today and talk to you about tourism and antiquities in Egypt. This is, what we're trying to build in the tourism sector in Egypt. And over the coming 10 minutes, I'm going to very quickly explain to you the key headlines of what we're trying to do. And then I'm going to sit here for Cyba to grill me with some questions afterwards. Does that sound like a good plan with you? Let me just start first by asking you a few questions so I can understand the audience. How many of you, let's see a show of hands, how many of you have either visited Egypt or feels that will definitely visit Egypt in the future? Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so you've just made my job a little bit easier today. That's exactly the point. The addressable market for the Egyptian tourism product is 100% of the people who can travel in the world. This is an amazing fact, because if you look at the United Nations Tourism Organization statistics, they show that this year probably 1.4 billion people will travel the world as tourists. And we think in the Ministry of Tourism in Egypt that about 1.8 billion people will visit the world, will travel the world as tourists in 2028. So from the show of hands today, it shows us that the issue that Egypt is not realizing so far its potential in the global tourism industry, not because of demand, not because of the lack of demand. It must be something else. I'm at London Business School. If it's not demand, it has to be supply. So this is basically, the basic premise of what we're trying to do in Egypt with tourism, to try to fix the supply side. And what I'm going to explain to you over the coming 10 minutes, very quickly, how we're doing that. But before I do that, of course, coming from Egypt, I have to talk about history. Egypt has been receiving tourists since humanity began. If you look at when you visit Egypt, those of you who have not made the trip yet, I encourage you actually to go visit some of these temples and museums. Every leader in Egypt who have left a temple or a tomb where there are inscriptions on it have explained their CV on the tomb. So the gods at the end can understand if they've done enough good in their life to be able to receive a good eternal life or not. Ancient Egyptians believed that Ma'at, the god, is going to come and weigh your heart if you've done good in your life, if you've been honest, if you've achieved your missions, if you protected the interests of stakeholders, you will do well in the eternal life. And if not, the opposite is going to happen to you. So Egyptians actually left what is basically we call today a CV, what they have done. So there are tombs in Egypt for governors in Egypt who have explained how they have welcomed foreigners, how they have naturalized them in the modern world, and how they were tolerant to strangers. This is actually a very interesting scripture of what today would be Levant, modern Levant, and these would be travelers from Levant to areas in southern Egypt, and how the Egyptians would actually make them to act like local people. And there are also scriptures of Queen Hatshepsut traveling to what is now Ethiopia, and how the trade has started to happen. And since that time, Egyptians have understood the value of tolerance and its importance in accepting others, being kind to others. And this is probably one of the most significant value propositions today for global travelers. Those of you who have visited Egypt, especially if you've visited Egypt with a regulated travel advisor, you will have really felt the kindness of the locals and how they would like to welcome the strangers. So Egyptians also have been strong believers that travel brings peace between nations, brings pacts of peace with other nations, and is able to create peaceful coexistence with other nations in the world. And you can see that as well when you travel to Egypt on some of the very first treaties that were struck by Ramses II with his neighbors on how to coexist together. So Egyptians have accepted tourists and travelers since, for thousands of years now. Everyone in the world who is willing and able to travel is part of the addressable market. So why hasn't Egypt, or why has Egypt only been receiving 0.9% market share, global share, in 2019, while countries in Europe have received 5 and 6% market share? It actually turns out that we need to define a whole new relationship with the industry as government. So we have set these set of goals. We have said that we would like to see the private sector lead an industry which is growing at 25 to 30% per annum, an ambitious goal, led by a robust private sector and governed by an effective regulatory framework. We have also identified the key segments or the key products that we think Egypt has a significant competitive advantage with. These are the family vacationers, resort relaxers, cultural explorers, and then this group of customers, this group of travelers that we think probably are going to be about 10% of the global travel market in 2028, which would like to do multiple experiences in the same trip. The cultural and leisure vacationers. So these guys would be those who would fly to Sharm el-Sheikh or to Hurghada and then drive to Luxor or drive to Cairo for a night or two to see the pyramids or to see the temples of Luxor. We think that the last, or the first, culture and leisure vacationers, I don't think that any other country in the world has the competitive advantage that Egypt has. And for those customers, Egypt has deployed most of the infrastructure that was directed to tourism. Egypt spent 22% of its GDP over the past 7 years on infrastructure projects that are designed to improve the quality of life for Egyptians, but also are designed to serve the tourism industry. And I'll give you one example. Today, it takes about 6 hours to drive from Luxor to Hurghada for this segment of customers. in a couple of weeks, a new road will be built, state-of-the-art, high-speed internet that is going to cut the time needed to travel from Hurghada to Luxor to 4 hours. In early 2026, Siemens will have finished the high-speed rail that is going to further cut the time needed to travel from Hurghada to Luxor to 2.5 hours. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of fixing the supply side, the infrastructure required for tourism to thrive. But it's not only about that. We're working actually on 3 pillars. The first is aviation. We're fixing the policies that the Egyptian government has towards the civil aviation industry to ensure that there is enough aviation seats. 90% of 9 in every 10 tourists who travel in Egypt arrive via air. So we have to be able to work with the private sector and civil aviation industry to grow the seats arriving in Egypt 5 or 6 times over the coming 15, 20 years to be able to realize the fair market share of Egypt in the global tourism industry. And we're also going to work on the tourist experience in the museums, in the ancient temples, ancient archaeological sites, at the airports, to be able to provide a better working customer experience for tourists when they visit Egypt. And the third is actually basically about the core infrastructure for the tourism industry to thrive, the hotel rooms. There are only 220,000 hotel rooms in Egypt today. And given the trends currently in the global tourism industry visiting Egypt, that makes the capacity for these 220,000 rooms is about 15 million tourists a year, given the trends for the number of room nights per tourist, given how many tourists stay in the same room, and given the seasonality. And there are several factors that affect to what extent can a hotel room serve a certain number of tourists. Given those trends, Egypt, the capacity today of the current hotel capacity is about 15 million tourists. So in order to be able to move to 30 million tourists in 2028, we need to double the hotel capacity. Anybody here in the hospitality industry works for the hotel or real estate? Okay, thank you. So please talk to me after the, after the presentation. I'll be very happy to talk more about that. Now, you can't grow the number of hotel rooms. You cannot double the number of hotel rooms without policies and incentives that are designed to help the private sector lead and build those hotel rooms. So number one, we are redesigning and enhancing all the public spending programs. In 2022, most of the public spending that were directed to the tourism industry were directed to subsidize antiquities and restoration work and maintenance work on the tourists in the tourist sites. The Egyptian government has changed that, and actually we are now going to redirect those public spending to incent hotel builders and be able to replace the funding on restoration and maintenance of the sites. We are increasing the ticket prices to be able to charge the visitors and tourists the fair market price for those tickets. They are still, by the way, less, visiting the entire pyramids visit is still less than half the price ticket for the Tower of London. So you can see to what extent we can still, or the wheel. So the second thing is actually, we're changing the role of government in the relationship with the private sector. We have changed it. So instead of the government being viewed as the leader of the tourism industry or we're actually changed our role to being a regulator. The role of the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities today is to ensure that a tourist receives what they were promised by the 8,000 companies which the ministry regulates. On the side of that role, as a regulator, licensing and monitoring the performance and monitoring the promises made and how they are delivered, on the side of that, we're collecting some money from the private sector, those 8,000 companies, and spending them on promotion and communication under significantly improved standards of governance and transparency with the private sector. So we have created advisory boards which watch exactly how we spend every dollar of money that we collect from the private sector on promotion and communication, on the tourism products, on the 4 products that I mentioned in the previous slide. We're also improving the digital experience in our museums and antiquities. We're providing e-visa platforms, so you don't have to go to the consulate here. I have the ambassador, His Excellency Ambassador Sharif Kamil, with me here today, the ambassador to the UK. The work that now people need to do with the consulate in order to obtain visas in Egypt are actually almost non-existent. You could either get the visa in 48 hours on the e-visa platform, or a lot of nationalities can even get the visa upon arrival in any of the Cairo airports. We're improving legislations. We're coming up with legislations that would create civil society organizations which would truly represent the industry to the benefit of the industry. The government of Egypt is committed to making sure that the civil society organizations which represent the private sector can truly build a strong organization to do policy advocacy, to play self-regulatory role, and most importantly, to be able to fill for the gap that is created by the industry being a very fragmented industry. It's a very fragmented industry in Egypt. So we have to do a lot of capacity building across the regulator and across the companies in Egypt. It's the 8,000 companies that represent the industry, only few of them would generate more than $1 billion of revenues. And it's a private sector-led growth. So to be able to incent hotel builders to build faster, we're coming up with few things that would make so. You heard this morning Ayman, my colleague Ayman, who is the head of the fund, the Sovereign Wealth Fund in Egypt. Ayman is working with the private sector to be able to give the government buildings that were just vacated in downtown to the private sector to build hotels. And within the next couple of weeks, we're going to announce whole new incentives that are designed to give money to subsidize the cost of funding, at 12%. By the way, inflation in Egypt this year is going to probably be around 30%, north of 30%. So this is negative real interest rates of more than 20%, actually, of around 20%. And the difference is going to be paid by the taxpayers, by the Ministry of Finance, directly to the bank account of the borrower, who's going to use the money to either build new hotel rooms or acquire hotel rooms that have been operating for more than 12 months. And we're going to give incentives, tax breaks, up to 50% of the capital expenditure required to build a hotel in the first year of operations. And they can be amortized over 5 years after operations. And all of these things have led to, I'll give you just one case study. One of the smartest investors in the world, one of the smartest sovereign wealth funds in the world, have actually just paid $35 billion to acquire 170 million square meters of land on the north coast of Egypt, in the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. And they've committed to developing those 170 million square meters into a magnificent new city that is designed to work 12 months in the year, Today, there are deep seasonality in the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. Deep seasonality. With this kind of investment, private sector investment, led by a very smart sovereign wealth fund, ADQ, we expect the North Coast to have a whole new face. Today, by the way, the North Coast is just less than 3,000 hotel rooms. So you can, so with this, we expect thousands of new rooms to come to service over the coming 5 to 7 years. And with it as well, we expect the private sector here to be able to change the perception of the Mediterranean coast from a deeply seasonal 2-3 months in a year destination to at minimum of 10 months a year destination. And that is going to lead to significant improvement in the economics of hotel capacity in the Mediterranean coast. So to conclude, the national strategy for tourism in Egypt is built around the monetization of our cultural heritage, the ability to put in policies in place to allow the private sector to lead under a framework of good regulatory environment to allow the tourists to receive what they were promised. And at the same time, in order to do that, we're putting in policies to double the number of aviation seats, double the number of hotel rooms, and improve customer experience. This is all. I think now I'm going to be joined by Cyba to ask me a few questions. And thank you very much for your listening.
Please, تفضل.
أنا هنا?
You go ahead.
Okay, all right.
Yes. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you very much. That's a thrilling presentation. You got us all very excited. I'm very ready to board the plane. I don't know about the rest of you. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Cyba Audi. I'm a senior anchor and editor-at-large at Al-Sharq Bloomberg. We are owned by Saudi Research and Media Group, and we have multiple platforms, obviously. I have a morning show every day. Please tune in, Sabah Ma Cyba. You get a very good view of what's happening in the world on multiple fronts. Your Excellency, tourism in Egypt is a cornerstone of the Egyptian economy, of course, but it's also a bellwether of global tourism. Now, global tourism saw about 850 million tourists last year. Egypt saw about 15 million of those. We do the maths, that's about 1.2, just around 1%, let's say, of, unlike global tourism, tourism in Egypt in the last 3 years has grown by a good 33%. Given all the upheaval in the region, what's happening at the doorstep of Egypt, we must ask the question, how does Egypt manage to grow its tourism, manage to grow its share of tourism in the world, given everything that's happening on its doorstep? If you go back, you Google Egypt tourism, and you go back about 10, 12 years, you will find that the news headlines are very similar to what we're seeing today. They were eerily, as if they were written for today. Still, we find Egypt comes back time and time again. What's the secret sauce?
Well, I think we're very lucky over the past 6 months, as we have communicated very quickly with the companies which populate the supply chain of the Egyptian product. The Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities in Egypt view tourism as an industry, as products, as companies which provide the service and products to their customers. We understand the risks that have increased for them over the fourth quarter and first quarter of this year. And this is what we have communicated with them. We sent out letters late October and actually the 20th, exactly. And we told them, guys, we understand that risks have just gone up for you.
You told them that you will de-risk the product.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So what does that mean? What does it mean for them?
So tour operators take a lot of risks. They buy the hotel rooms in advance. They buy the aviation seats in advance. We have told them, keep those. Don't pull those investments backwards. Don't roll them back. And we're going to be able to take the risks with you. And as we did that, we have come up quickly with very robust programs that we have designed working with the top 50, 60 tour operators. And as a result, aviation seats have started to flow, and the product has stayed on the shelves of the retailers in the countries which export tourists to Egypt.
And by that, and you managed to actually transcend the numbers, the maximum numbers that Egyptian tourism has ever achieved, which was 14.7 million tourists back in 2012, and now last year it was 14.9 million tourists. Do you see that continuing? You've set a target of 30 million in 2028. Where did you come up with the 30 million number? Why 30? It could have been 28 million in 2028. It has a nicer ring to it.
Yeah, actually, I didn't think about that. I should have. But it would have reduced the target. But no, on a serious note, if you look, we have projected the number of total. We believe that, as I said in my presentation, we believe that the number of global travelers in 2028 are going to be in the range of 1.7 to 1.8 billion. And we're looking at a market share of about 1.6 to 1.7, up from 0.9%, as I said, in 2019. And the reason is actually that we have segmented the customers, the travelers, by 2028. And we think that the 4 products that I talked about, given the target market share for every one of them and for every behavioral segment of those customers, together they came up with about 29-point-something million. So this is how we came up with the 30 million numbers.
So after the events of October of last year in the region on Egypt's doorstep, we saw that dip, which was expected. And then, but now we're talking about record figures again. I read a news headline yesterday saying everyone's falling in love with Egypt again, which is a beautiful headline. Now, I would like you to tell me, Your Excellency, what will Egypt do to reciprocate that love?
Well, first I was actually heartened by when I asked everyone in the audience at the beginning, and I almost got 100% show of hand and this is, to tell you the truth, it's heartening for me as an Egyptian. As I go around the world, I can't remember that I've ever told anyone in any country that I visited that I'm Egyptian that I haven't received the same response. Oh, I really want to be there. I really want to visit. So it's upon the private sector in Egypt, the industry in Egypt, regulators and companies, to be able to build a product and serve it well and present it well and deliver it well to the customers. And I think this is what we as an industry have to do. And by the way, when I said that when we have segmented the market, we have determined the target market share and so forth, I didn't mean we as the government. I meant we as the industry. And because as I lead one entity, one organization in that industry, which is the regulator, the message that I want the private sector, global investor community to understand, and audience like this great audience actually to understand, that the industry is now trying to build the right institutional frameworks that would actually make it as efficient as industries in the developed world. We all look up to the UK, to Spain, to Italy and France, how they've built an industry, Germany, of course. And we're trying to rebuild institutions that can deliver the same organizational capacities to be able to deliver the right services to the customers.
And for that, you need money. And money makes the world go round, of course. Let's talk about a little bit in money terms. 2019 was your highest revenues from tourism in Egypt's history. March 2023 was a very good month, $850 million in revenues. So 2023 is on track to be a very, very good year. How much does that make up of Egypt's total GDP. I'm trying to figure out where the money is going to come from for you to fix the supply side.
So certainly the money is going to come from the private sector. And the last case study that I showed is one case study that shows to what extent are the industry promising risk-adjusted returns to investors. I usually like, given my background, I always like to talk about risk-adjusted returns, not returns in absolute terms.
Yeah.
So risk-adjusted returns in Egypt have typically been very high. And in the tourism industry in specific, over the coming 5 years, the global investor community is expecting that the risk-adjusted returns in that industry is going to be one of the highest in the world. Now, the reason is not only because of the policies, not only because of the demand that exists, as you've seen today, and as all our studies, but also because of the quality of execution that the Egyptian government has been delivering on building the roads, the bridges, the train lines, renovating the airports, increasing their capacity. And at the same time, because of the global aviation community, adding every single day a new line from the major cities which deliver the customers to Egypt. And I'll close with this. And because of the quality of investments in things like the Grand Egyptian Museum.
Yes.
The financial reform that the ministry has led over the past 18 months to be able to allocate money where it actually is the most effective, like the building the Grand Egyptian Museum. The Cairo is going to be represented to the world over the coming 3 years as a short city break. Typically, most tourists today in Egypt come for the Red Sea and would probably do a night or two visiting Cairo and Luxor. For the coming 3 years, Cairo is going to be a destination on its own. Short city breaks are probably one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing tourism product in Europe today. And we expect to, with the Grand Egyptian Museum and with the significant investments that we're doing through the private sector in the improving the customer experience at the pyramids and Sphinx and in central Cairo, I think Cairo is going to receive its fair market share in global tourism for short city break over the coming 3 to 5 years.
Okay, so there are two elements to this, the private sector and the public sector, obviously. On the private sector, how confident are we that the hot money will return? How confident are we that this money is going to come back and commit? On the public sector, you're competing as tourism, you're competing with other major industries for Egypt. You have manufacturing, which contributes about 15% to GDP. You have retail, which about 13%, 11% for agriculture, and then you come in at around 7 or 8%, if my numbers are correct.
Absolutely correct, as usual.
At Islam. So you're up against some serious competition for all that infrastructure reform that needs to come from the public sector, from the government.
Correct. And it's true that, on average, the productivity of an Egyptian working in manufacturing, for example, is typically higher than the tourism industry. That's absolutely true. But the reason I could convince my colleague, the Minister of Finance, Dr. Maid, for example, with the incentive package that I just explained to you, is the following. Every 15,000 rooms added to the capacity in Egypt generate up to $2 billion of revenues into what is already a deficit current account. Number two, it produces about 2 billion Egyptian pounds of value-added taxes. And it produces about 1.5 billion Egyptian pounds of, that's by the way in 2022, 2023, the fiscal year these are the numbers from that fiscal year. And with those things, we could prove that actually the tourism industry, despite the fact that the productivity of the working hour is probably less than manufacturing, it deserves to be supported. And as a result, these kind of incentives, this incentive package of subsidized cost of funding is quite unique.
Yeah.
Dr. Maid is also coming up with similar incentives to manufacturing and agriculture. But then I'm very proud of the ability to convince my colleagues on the cabinet of the need for policies, on the economics of those policies, of incenting fast growth. By the way, Egypt built 14,000 new hotel rooms in 2023. That's the highest number ever. And when that dialogue started to happen, there was a bit of concern. Why would you want to build faster? Because that, of course, puts pressure on utilization and nisab al-ishghal, on occupancy rates. And the feedback that I've been receiving from the private sector is exactly the feedback that I got when I first asked that question. Just build it and they will come.
Yeah, they will come. Okay, so on the private sector side, we all know tenets of learning at business schools, رأس المال جبان, or capital is a coward. But you gave the example of Ras al-Hikma. Let's talk a little bit about that. $35 billion, a great investment. It is not a retail investment in real estate, nor is it an investment in tourism. it is touted to be the money that is going to save the Egyptian economy. $35 billion is not going to save a $500 billion economy. But how will it trickle through the economy? How will this private investment in Ras al-Hikma, how do you see that working in your plan?
Well, it's private money that is generated by a very, very smart sovereign wealth fund that is seeking economic risk-adjusted returns, that is designed to invest in the real estate industry and tourism hospitality industry. So two industries are going to benefit from that initial investment into this plot of land that is, as I said, 170 million square meters. And south of that land, there's going to be an additional 1.5 by 5 kilometers plot of land for that investor to build an airport to serve the city. And over the coming few months, we expect that investor to provide detailed master plans for the government to approve it on how they are going to develop this 170 million square meters. We expect from the initial discussions with them that most of it is going to be hotels and to build a local investment arm or investment industry, financial industry. And as well, of course, there's going to be lots of residential spaces and commercial spaces.
Sorry to interrupt you. Do those hotels factor into your next 200,000 rooms?
Oh, absolutely. I hope so.
They're part of that.
As far as I'm concerned, I would like to see the entire 170 million square meters built into hotels. But of course, that can be. But we're working very closely as well with other investors along the Red Sea and in Cairo.
Because did your plan come first, and then Ras al-Hikma, or Ras al-Hikma came in, and then your plans for building the next 200,000 rooms?
Well, I can tell you that these plans actually are the plans of the government of Egypt, and those plans started, when Egypt, that road that I was just talking about that reduces the distance, the time needed to travel from Hurghada to Luxor.
That's amazing.
This started with the infrastructure project of Egypt, infrastructure modernization project in Egypt when President Sisi came to power. And this is, I think, what a key message, that these are driven by big strategies, and I'm here now to play a certain role, to improve the regulatory role, to be able to get the private sector to deliver a product to a customer and ensure that they receive what they were promised.
And that's how you reciprocate the love.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how much pickup have you seen, or have we seen any pickup on Ras al-Hikma yet? Interest, how much would you say interest there is at the moment?
Well, there's no doubt that the size of the investment is making a lot of eyebrows actually rise, and it's the single largest, I think, investment in emerging markets over the past few months. And when the company which bought the land for $35 billion, I'm sure they're going to come up with an equally bold master plan for the development of that. I don't want to call it project. It's probably going to be a whole new city on the Mediterranean that, as a Minister of Tourism, to tell you the truth, I'm very excited about it, because one of the things that have always been a challenge to me since I took this job is the choice of where I would allocate the resources, where I would allocate the incentives. Because a room on the Red Sea does not have the same seasonality of a room on the Mediterranean Sea. The Red Sea, a room can receive customers for 10 months a year minimum. The North Sea, the rooms, and this is why we have not seen large investments yet.
Right.
But then comes this bold investor, smart investor, who has a vision of reducing the seasonality. And this is why I'm very, very excited on the personal level and on the official level with this investment.
Let me ask you, as an Egyptian, the North Coast has been
best kept secret for Egyptians.
Kept secret for Egyptians. It's your own little. It's where the locals go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aren't you risking upsetting the locals by opening up the North Coast to the foreigners?
I've heard this concern several times,
Yeah.
but people don't realize that the distance from Alexandria to the Libyan borders are more than, I think, 300 kilometers. So there is lots of room to provide a product to the world that is very, very unique, and at the same time keep few hundred kilometers to Egyptians to enjoy their best kept secret. So
right.
That's and the concept of over-tourism as well we're still probably 3 or 4 decades away from that concept being, we've seen what the Spaniards, for example, have been doing in the Canary Islands or the Balearic Islands about over-tourism. And I say to the Brits, Egypt welcomes you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Germans.
Absolutely.
And the
yeah, we're in
Russians.
London today, and I would, if
Yeah.
we were in, yeah.
You've always been a very hospitable people. You're not
Of
going
course,
to change
of course.
anytime soon.
Actually, you're absolutely right, Cyba. In 2023, Germans were about 1.5 million tourists in Egypt. But the Brits this year in 2023 are the fastest growing.
Oh, interesting.
So we should probably see about 800 to 900,000 Britons visit Egypt this year.
Very interesting. Let us talk a little bit about the other side of your portfolio, the Antiquities. And before I ask you about the museum, I just wanted to ask you the other problem, obviously, that you also mentioned earlier that the Egyptian economy is facing is inflation, currently running at a more acceptable 30%. Of course, we saw where it all went. The devaluation of the currency has made tourism more affordable, obviously, but the inflation is causing you to, probably is eroding your budgets to work on your programs for the Antiquities side of things. So how are you managing that? And you mentioned that visiting the pyramids is a fraction of anything else abroad.
Yeah, it is.
Are you likely to increase price tickets, and where do you think there's a ceiling?
So we have announced a policy at the Council for Antiquities, which I proudly chair as a non-executive chairman in my capacity as the Minister of Tourism and Antiquities. The policy is very simple. We've said to the market, we will continue to follow the general price levels in the country, and we will increase prices each year with the inflation announced by the Central Bank of Egypt. And in doing so, we plan to really protect the finances of the council. I'll tell you a very small story afterwards, right now. When I took over, actually, just a couple of weeks into my job, I asked for the projects for restoration and maintenance of our temples and sites. And there were more than 100 of them. And more than half of them were actually shut down because of lack of funding.
Yeah.
In that year, the fiscal year, June 2022, the Council for Antiquities generated only 1 billion Egyptian pounds of revenues and spent 3 billion Egyptian pounds to restore and to maintain projects. So to put this into context, the Metropolitan, have anybody been to New York, the Metropolitan,
Yep.
the Met?
Yep.
So the annual budget for the Met is more than $300 million. So you can see that 2,000 archaeological sites and 40 museums spend less than half of what the Met spends in a year.
Yeah.
And that's not stable, and that's not sustainable. So we have to be able to, in a country, budget realities are everywhere, from the UK, from the developed markets to emerging markets. I have to be sensible to the budget realities that the government of Egypt faces. And this is why I could work with the private sector in Egypt to be able to convince them that over the years, we're going to get the price levels of tickets to levels that the tourists are willing and able to pay. And at the same time, we're going to have certain surgical discounts that are designed to make sure that this, as a cultural product, is also available to every possible person on earth who's actually want to enjoy culture and to be able to have a feel and touch the history that has been left by the ancient Egyptians.
Is there a particular demographic that you are targeting for this plan between now?
It's different from one country to the other. So, for example, our customer segment in the UK is different from the segments in Germany or in France. So, for example, France and Spain are mostly about cultural tourists, while the UK and Germans are about the beach tourists. But
where do you see the highest return? Well, in absolute, where do you see, which kind of tourists would you like to see? Not just to take it to 30 million tourists, but also to contribute financially.
That's a good question. To tell you the truth, we're focused on these 4 products equally.
Right.
We see that the competitive advantage for the Egyptian products in these 4 products are compelling. By the way, there are many other products. By the way, it's important to actually say this. This doesn't mean that tour operators who want to operate or tourists who want to come, for example, for desert safaris are not welcomed. I'm not saying that. Absolutely they are. But I'm saying where I'm going to allocate the budgets and resources for marketing and communication and support and building the capacity of the ministry as a regulator. So the world has many, many other tourism products. And by the way, a country like Spain, for example, but just 3 of these 4 products, they've reached 80 million tourists last year. So this is, I think is testimony to and this is why the Emiratis, for example, ADQ could find the opportunity on the tourism industry in Egypt. And this is why we see significant private sector money will continue to pour into this industry going forward.
That's great. Last question, important for everybody here, the Grand Museum. The official opening date has been and gone. What's happening? What's the new timeline? So
the museum itself will be ready to operate starting June 1st. But because the Egyptian government is investing so heavily in improving the infrastructure for Cairo, for the global tourists, to be able to present the Cairo as a proper city break, the surrounding area around the museum is still filled with construction work, mobilization for the construction company that is working on the underground line, for example, that is going to link the museum and the pyramids with West and Central Cairo. So we're now trying to think in the government if we would at least have a soft operation until the geopolitical situation in the region improves and until the the construction work around the museum is finished, or do not open it until the grand opening date is set. I promise you that, but can I show of hands who,
Yeah.
grand opening or soft operations?
So how do we vote? Soft opening? Anyone for soft opening?
Soft opening? No?
Come on,
grand
guys.
opening?
A grand opening?
Yeah, okay. So, yeah,
I think soft opening.
obviously I'm being beaten on this actually because I was for the soft operations. So,
Yeah.
I guess the mainstream thinking is still preferred to wait for the grand opening. The construction work, actually, the companies that are working on these construction projects are working day and night to be able to finish the underground. But I'm very proud to say actually that the museum itself, and the Antiquities has been laid to in their showcases. It's a magnificent place.
Don't keep saying that because you're really exciting us to see it, and you're not ready to show us.
Yeah, tell me about it. Tell me about it. I promise that we're working very, very hard to make sure that the surrounding area is also is up to the level that this magnificent museum is going to be.
I'm sure. We wish you all the best, and thank you very much. We appreciate you and your hard work, and we look forward to seeing it all.
Well, thank you
very
much.
much, ladies and gentlemen. His Excellency Ahmed Issa.